Sure. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our session 2, Lessons from Other Project, Bibliographical and Textual Databases in the Field of Christianity in China. I will not spend much time introducing our speakers. They are well known to many in our community. The first speaker is Professor Nicolas Stendert, professor in the Sinology Research Unit at the Katholieke Universiteit Leuven in Belgium. I have known him for many years. I've been a postdoc there. I have sent you also a link to his own page, but as you see, he's a very modest man, or maybe his university is very, they don't put a lot of information, but he's one of the doyen in our field. So Professor Stendert, if you want, you can start. I hope I can see you here. Not yet. Maybe he's having a little bit of issues connecting. So we are going to get in touch with him. And what we can do while we try to get in touch with Professor Stendert, if you do not mind, Professor Xiao, would you like to go ahead and start with your presentation so that we use all our time? Is that okay with you?
Yes.
Okay. So Professor Xiao Jinghe is also quite well known in our community. I'm sending you here a link to his personal website page. He is at the moment calling in from Penn State University in the United States visiting, but actually he is at Shanghai University and a very active voice on the internet. So he will be presenting on the experience of building the Chinese Christian bibliography database at Shanghai University.
Thank you, Professor Menegon. I will share my screen. Oh, is that
okay? Now I have allowed.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning.
So you need, just a moment, you need to eliminate the sharing page. So hit share.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, I have seen that the Professor Stendert to share the screen. Should I?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, you need to share again. Sorry.
I try again.
Yeah, it worked now. If you go ahead once more.
All right.
Excellent.
Thank you, Professor Menegon. Thank you very much. Good morning. Nice to meet you by the internet. My name is Qinghe Xiao. I am from the Department of History, Shanghai University. Thank you for having me here today. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce Chinese Christian bibliography database. I want to talk about three topics today. Why should we do this project? Christianity has been in China for more than 1,000 years, since Tang Dynasty, and has left a large number of texts in Chinese, although there are already some important references in this field. There is no complete bibliography, nor a complete collection of Chinese Christian texts. One is this project funded by the Chinese government. Since the beginning of the 21st century, some scholars proposed the synthesization of religion, especially synthesization of Christianity. Some scholars also proposed the Christian theology. Then the synthesization of Christianity has become an important theory for the Chinese government to promote the colonization of Christianity in China. As a result, our project received the highest funding in China. This project was approved in October 2012 and started on December 15th in the same year. The project leader is Professor Fei Yatao at Shanghai University. We have been funded 3 times by the same program, which shows that the Chinese government take this project very seriously. We were funded more than 2 million Chinese yuan. We have a team of more than 50 people, most of whom are graduate students. We have collaborated with more than 10 institutions, including Shanghai Library, Guangxi Normal University Press, National Library of China, and so on. This project has made great progress in these aspects. At first, our team find lots of new or rare materials in Chinese, which was never or few used by scholars. For example, in cooperation with Shanghai Library, the research team sorted out the rare books collected in the Bibliotheca Zikanwei, which was founded in 1847 by the Society of Jesus. There are 2,061 books and more than 9,000 volumes. The library has not been sorted out since it was taken over by the government. The Shanghai Library supports us by sending us books by car every day. The research team has also made some new discoveries in the archives. Our team found nearly 500 kinds of Catholic books and documents during the Ming and Qing dynasties in the National Library of France. In South Korea, we find 81 volumes of rare materials introduced into Korea from China. We published some rare documents with the title of Rare Christian Literature Series. The first series with 10 volumes had already been published by the Guangxi Normal University Press in 2017. Along with collecting and publishing the rare documents, we have also done extensive researches. We have also published a journal. Its title is Religion and History. It is mainly used to publish the results of this project. This project has greatly pushed the historic study of Christianity in China, especially in the military areas. In order to promote achievements of this project, we also held an exhibition from January 19 to July 10, 2018. The exhibition received more than 20,000 visitors. The former French president visited the exhibition. Now let's turn to the database. The database has more than 30,000 entries with 668 field tests. We cooperation with Guangxi Normal University Press, Shanghai branch, and Shanghai Library to build this database. The database is divided into 2 parts: bibliographic information and field test data. This is the website of the database. Anyone can access the site. At the top of the site is the title of the database and the banner, below which is the author's biography, a user login button, and a description of the database. The left side of the site can be browsed by subjects. At the bottom left is the list of the donors. In the middle is the search box. Entering the search page, you can make a simple search, and you can enter any character search. The search results can be exported or printed. After logging in, you can also save the search results. Also, you can search in the search results. Advanced search can be performed by selecting sub-project categories and also by selecting fuzzy or precise searches. The documents of the database can be browsed by various subjects. By clicking on an entry, detailed information is available, such as the title, author, time, edition, preface, and postscript, and so on. This is the website of the backend of the database. Administrators have greater authority and can input, review, edit, delete, log, upload, or download entries and full test data. When the administrators log in the background, he or she can find the latest entry information. At the top, there are buttons for list data, adding new data, importing new data, and so on. The list of data shows all the entry. Adding new data is to input new data entries. Importing new data can import data. There are buttons for data management, other data management, and user management on the left side of the banner. To add a new entry, data management can be searched according to defined conditions, including search according to the review status. To add a new entry, you need to select the form classification, including archives, serial publications, letters, and books. Some information is required, such as title, author, time, size, keywords, and so on. Some is optional. You can also enter abstract research literature and upload the relevant images or PDF files. After entering the information, you can submit it for review. After certain review, the relevant entries can be searched or displayed on the website. Currently, the database contains some PDF full tests and a small number of TXT full tests. After entering the search, if the result shows the full test, you can click to browse the related images or PDF or TXT full test. We have developed a detailed manual that provides detailed instructions for gathering information, inputting entries, reviewing, modifying, editing, and maintaining the database. To date, there are 13,371 entries in the database. Of this, there are 9,668 entries in archive, 841 entries in the serial publication, 1,216 entries in letters, and 18,646 entries in books. By subject, there are 1,677 entries in Catholicism during the Ming and early Qing dynasties, 2,046 entries in Catholicism in the late Qing dynasty, 5,194 entries in Protestantism in the late Qing dynasty, 3,336 entries in Catholicism in the period of Republic of China, 18,034 entries in Protestantism in the period of Republic of China, and 44 entries in Eastern Orthodox Church. With a chart of the number of documents different categories in different periods. By the time, there are 1,677 entries in the Ming and Qing dynasty, 7,429 entries in the late Qing dynasty, and 21,395 entries in the period of Republic of China. By denomination, the Catholic Church has 5,421 entries. The Protestant Church has 23,223 entries, and Orthodox has 44 entries. By publishing institution, the Christian Israeli Society for China has a large number. The Catholic 慈母堂 in Shanghai also has a large number. By place of collection, Shanghai has the most, followed by Nanjing and Paris. The largest number of documents publishing during late Ming and early Qing dynasty can be found in the 1630s. The Chinese Catholic literature of Ming and Qing dynasties mainly composed of block prints and manuscripts. Most of the contents were doctrines. With a set of institutions publishing and collecting Chinese Catholic documents from the 1518s to 1840s. These are the charts of the distribution of scientific works between 1582 and 1722. Based on the database, we have made a research on the keyword of Trinity and composed some papers. During the construction of the database, we also collect a large number of pictures or photos. Now let's turn to the experience. At first, we need a team to build the database. This project has a team of professors and graduate students. Firstly, the project is divided into 5 sub-projects, each of which is led by a senior professor with a research team consisting of other relevant faculty members. Secondly, we also have a team of several dozen graduate students. Again, we have a team of professionals, mainly from libraries. Firstly, we also have a team from publishing house and database company. We cooperate with Guangxi Normal University Press Shanghai branch to develop the database. The pairs had experience in developing databases. They provide the server, develop the database according to our advice, and make a modification and adjustments as required. This project is very extensive and requires collaboration with different organizations and individuals to make it possible. We are also very fortunate to get the help and support from many organizations and people. Professor Nicholas Standard, Professor Ryan Danch, Professor Philip Vickery, Dr. Xiaoxin Wu, and many others have provided support and assistance. We have collaborated with dozens of universities and institutions. We have also received donations and help from individuals, such as Dr. Zun Xianglin from Hong Kong. We have also received help from some databases, such as the CCT database developed by Professor Nicholas Standard and Dr. Dulink, and a database by Professor Ryan Danch, and so on. Database construction requires a detailed manual or handbook. Most of our team members are professors and graduate students studying the history of religions are not very familiar with database construction. Our team of graduate students needed to follow the manuals in terms of inputting entries and modification, database development and maintenance. Our team developed a very detailed manual that was modified, adjusted, and uploaded as needed. In this case, our graduate student can enter information according to the manual. Our goal in building the database is to share it with scholars and to be a tool for the study of history of Christianity in China. Therefore, when we build the database, we focus on sharing our information with the scholars and academic institutions. Every year we hold different conferences and invite different scholars to attend and share our information. If a scholar needs to use our the database and request relevant materials, our team will provide for free of charge. The value of the database is in its use. More people use the database becomes more valuable. We hope that our database will be helpful to build the China Historical Christian Database and at Boston University. That's all. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Xiao. You actually were very efficient with your time, so we will have a little bit more time actually for wiggling around and discussion. I wonder if we are ready. Okay, so you actually can now type your questions, if you have any questions about the presentation by Professor Xiao in the Q&A section, and I will be seeing those. But I wonder if Wenlu, you have any question that you want to ask to open up, or let's see if there are questions regarding the project that Professor Xiao just presented to us. So let's give a moment here. So there is one question first. Professor Xiao, could you post the link to your database into the chat so that people can go now and visit it? And that would be nice. There is a question from Joseph He. How are the photographs and images organized in the database?
Thank you for your question. The photos, I think, is a link to the entry. If you search some of the entries, if the result shows that there are some picture or photos, then you can click to browse that. I think that maybe.
If you want to share, maybe you want to share the screen, yeah, and show us how that works. And also Joseph Ho was continuing asking, how are they searchable?
How are they searchable? Okay, if you input some characters such as Matthew Rich in the search box, then you can then the results will show in the page. However, if you want to know the details, it's needed to log in.
And login is free for everybody.
No, it's not. It's not yet.
Oh, explain.
Yeah, if you want to use this database, you should to contact us for free account. Then you can log in. Oh, not sure. Maybe I can log in the background. So if some scholars want to use this database, you can contact us at first. Then we will send you the free account. Then you can use the database. This is the backend.
Okay, and I think the question of Professor Joseph Ho was in particular about photographs. So besides the text, do you also have other materials?
I'm not sure. These photos or photographs are collected in the database because these photos are collected by Professor Fia Tao. I'm not sure.
Okay. So certainly you can follow up with more emails directly to Professor Xiao later. There is a question from Professor Chloe Starr from Yale. Can you tell us how you see the database developing in the future?
Oh, that's a good question. Thank you very much. As you know, the bibliographic database may be less useful. In the future, we would continue to cooperate with Shanghai Library and the Guangxi Normal University Press to develop this database. We will put more and more full tests in the database. So then make this database to become a full test database. I think it will be more and more useful to use and for the academic study. Thank you.
Another question is whether the database is only covering Christian texts, or also will cover materials found in provincial or local archives that are not necessarily Christian texts, but are connected to Christianity.
I think is cover all the Christianity since Tang Dynasty, including Nestorian, Catholicism, Christianity. From I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
So you are concentrating on Christian texts. I would say.
Yes,
Yeah.
but we also have archives and serial publication, letters, books.
Okay.
Mainly is books.
Okay.
Most of this collection are books. Some of them are archives.
Are you also covering other languages like Manchu, Tibetan,
No.
Uyghur? No, just
no.
Chinese and English?
Yeah, just in Chinese. As you know, it's very difficult to collect all the materials in Chinese. So it's more difficult to collect the material in other languages. Okay, thank you. Thank
And
you
another question is, are the texts OCR texts, or they are only scans? Do they have optical recognition?
Yeah. Some of the first tests only are only in PDF files, or small number, a small number of this tests TST test is very a few, not very much.
Okay. So there are so many questions, but we cannot answer them all now, but we are keeping them. And later on, Professor Xiao will be able to follow up with the individuals who have asked them. Let's now move on to our other speaker, Professor Nicholas Standard. I have already sent you a link. Our moderator will now send it again with a link to his biographical page, Akao Leuven. Please, Nicholas, go ahead. And his topic will be the lessons learned from the development of the Chinese Christian text database, the CCT database. Nicholas?
I hope that you hear me already. And now I will share my screen. And if that is okay, then we are ready to go. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so here we are. Excuse me for this delay. Apparently, technically, I always arrived in the other session. I'm very sorry for that, but we managed to solve it. So in the first place, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference to bring us all together, and also to give us the opportunity to present one of the databases. Some of you maybe know it already, others do not know it so much. So I will give it a general presentation and also link it somehow with the topic of this conference. So it is about the Chinese Christian text database, which is basically managed at this moment by Duding and myself, and you'll find the link below. You can also type in Google CCT database and you will have it. So what is the history of this database? In fact, the late Professor Erik Söcher started to collect handwritten notes on all the different texts that were in Chinese, written or published about Christianity in China in the 17th century. And then in the early 80s, I was asked to work on it, and then later on at Duding also worked on the same data. We were all writing on the same text, so we still have some of these copies, handwritten copies. But when I was appointed in Leuven, and I managed to invite Duding also to Leuven, we started to put the data in electronic means, in all kind of WordPerfect, Word files, sometimes even the Apple databases. So on the whole, this represents more or less 50 years of research. A major shift was in 2005, 2007, when we really entered it into a database. And this was the so-called Aleph database. Aleph was a bibliographical or a library system that was used also by Harvard, by Peking University, by our university. This was a kind of common library system. But what this system allowed a lot of possibilities, and normally it was only used for the library itself of your university. So in this database, you only had the references to books or whatever that you had in your own library. So what we did it is to convert the same system into two things. One, on the one hand, that you can use it for texts that are not in your own libraries, but in other libraries, and also to adapt it through all kind of links to specific research needs. Another advantage, because we were wondering, are we going to asking a special firm to make us a database? We chose for a stable database, maybe not completely stable, but an existing system software, so that if there were updates or so, we immediately could follow, and we did not encounter the risk of the bankruptcy of a private company where your whole database in the end is lost. So once there was an update of the Aleph system, which was used by our university, and that made it very easy. And then in the next stage, our university decided no longer to use the Aleph system and to convert to another system. And so the responsible for the library system, was more or less, but more than less, obliged also to find a solution for our database. And so in 2017, that took about 1 year, we had to convert all the data into Collective Access, which is a software for describing all manners of things and for creating catalogs, in which in fact the input is much easier. The search method, there are still some problems. I will not enter into these details, but that's the system we use. And there is an interface that is linked to Collective Access, and that is Pawtucket. So I provide also some of this technical information for those who are interested in developing databases. So what is the focus of this database? The focus is the contacts between China and Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. It includes more or less 1,050 Chinese primary sources, or I should say, it includes the references to 1,050 Chinese primary sources, which are preserved in the libraries all over the world. And of them, there are about 710 imprints and 340 manuscripts. And then you still have a number added to that, a number of titles of which we have not yet found the text itself. And in addition to that, there are references to about 4,000 European primary sources, and finally more than 9,000 secondary references. So that makes over 14,000 in total. So let us have a look at it. If you are not acquainted with it, this is the opening page. And as you can see, it's free, it's open access, no registration. I think that's also relatively easy, so they don't have to ask her whatever permission. It's completely open. So you have the simple thing like basic search. You can see it's basically like in any library. And let us search for the Tianzhu Shiyi of Matteo Ricci, because that gives an example of what is included. So you have the basic references of bibliographical references, the impressum, the date, and so on, if that is available. But then you see we add all kind of extra information. Important for this kind of works is to know who wrote the postfaces or the prefaces. And when you look at this Feng Yingjing, then you see we add more than simply the data of Feng Yingjing or the pages in the collection, but also reprints of that same preface, or even Latin translations or Italian translations or English translation, and where you can find them. The next information goes about the different facsimile editions. Facsimile editions, that means basically a photo reprint or a photocopy, but then printed, of course, of the text of the original text. Important are also the reprints. I only make a selection because with the Tianzhu Shi, the list is in fact very long, and also reprints in series. But you can see that with this data, we add very often very small information. And on top, you will see, oh, this is reproduced from the Peking Tashui copy. And below this is set to be reproduced from Borgia Sinense, but actually it's based on a facsimile edition. And so you'll find all kind of extra information. Then another topic still under the Tianzhu Shi is the different translations, the ancient translations in Manchu, in Mongolian, with every time the catalog in which they are mentioned. Then we have the library copies. As I mentioned already, you only receive a selection because Tianzhu Shi has many copies, but we also not only include the library, but also the shelf number where they can be found. You have similar things with ancient list. Ancient list, that means that some books are mentioned in list established by missionaries like Ruy de Figueiredo in 1627, or another list in 1642, and so on. And this is also important for the dating of the texts. And then you can check or where they were spread and so on. And the same with Chinese private library collections. And so you can see that Tianzhu Shi was present in the library of Qi Changhan, and who died in 1628. And so this is the result. And on top of it, you find the article, everything that is in blue. This is a link to another text or another reference within the library. The same for modern lists. So you have very important modern lists, like for instance by Bernard, but also translations. As you can see, Tianzhu Shi has been translated in modern editions in quite a few languages, and you find every time, if you click on the link, you find the reference. I come back a bit later on the notes on author or the notes on the text history. Finally, you have the categories. I come back on that, but very important, the links to the secondary sources. So all kind of articles that were published on the Tianzhu Shi. Again, it's only a selection because there are at least 30, 40 articles or books. You find the reference to it. And finally, if they are available, the URL links. And if you click on that, you'll find the copy in, for instance, the Arsi library of this database. So this was an example of the Chinese primary source, but we try to do the same with secondary sources. Here I give an example of one of the latest book by Noel Golvers, where we include also a description of the work, often taken by copied from the publisher, but sometimes annotated and put into the system of the library, but also, for instance, the chronological list of all the letters that you can find in that book, and we type it over and we make the reference so that you can easily check whether a person was addressed by Verbist, or whether someone wrote a letter to Verbist. Still linked to such books are book reviews, also notes on the contents. Very often we try to give the the table of contents so that you can have a quick link and the categories on which I come in a few minutes. The same we do with the secondary sources in terms of articles or chapters in books. This is an article by Ad Dudding. And as you can see, what I wanted to point out here, you have references to the contents with the Chinese characters, and then you find below primary source. So this is the other way around. With the Tianzhu Shiyi, this was a primary source, and you find the links to the secondary source. Here you have a secondary source, and you have the link to the primary source that was used for this article. So the point I want to make, so here you had a kind of overview of what is basically included in it. I go in a little bit more of depth to say that how, if we have to, let's say, define the database, I would call it a referential research database. The word database sometimes have the impression that all the documents are included in it, just like in the case of the database by Xiaojing He. But this is not in our case because we do not have the copyright of these texts. And we cannot simply put the texts that are in Paris or whatever. We can make the link, but we cannot photocopy them, let us say, and then, or take pictures and then put them in our database. That's not something that we can do. So this includes several actions to manage it, to manage the bibliographical data for research, to include existing research, to add new research, and to use the data for research. So briefly, how do we manage the bibliographical data for research? It's making the links. So that we spent a lot of time on making links. That means the primary and secondary sources, as I already explained. But as you can see, that's not just putting in and making a link. You have to very often to read an article or even a book and say, oh, on these pages of this book, there is a whole description on that work. And so we have to make a link to these pages of that book with the primary source. To check the translations, of course, the names and places, you can fully search them. And that's interesting, of course, for exchanges of names and of places with other databases. And I want to focus a little bit more on the full search of any word and categories. So if you want to use the database, never forget that any word on the basic page, and there is a category, any work, and if you write something there, then it searches the whole database for that word. So I take back, I use again the article by Ad Dudding. If you would have typed Ge Wu Chung Li Bian Lan or Thomas Meyer or Moses or Vulgata or whatever word, you will find this article, and that's very useful if you're searching a specific topic. There was the other day, a student who wanted to work on what is written on Mary. So you do Mary and you find all the articles that somehow refer to it. Another way of data management to make this possible. So we invest a lot of managing the data that are available. So you have this work by Tang Kai-Tien, where you have all the quotations of all kinds of people who wrote about Matteo Ricci. It's an enormous work, but in the book there is no index. And you cannot make a full search. So what we did is to divide. You can see that the same book is divided in about 7 parts. So we split up the different parts, and then we have all the names plus the data plus the pinyin transcription and the place where it is available in the book by Tang Kai-Tien. Basically, it means that if you are doing research on Gu Qiyuan, so you will find this reference and you will see that there is a contact between Gu Qiyuan and Matteo Ricci. Another way of data management is the categories, which is, of course, used in libraries. But here we use more or less 100 categories specific for our research field. And joining the question that was raised in the previous session, so for us, Christianity in the 17th century is used in the broad cultural sense of the word, and so including the sciences just in the same way as we did in the Handbook of Christianity in China. And basically, these categories are the same as in the Handbook of Christianity in China. And so if you search for clocks, you will find some articles by a very famous scholar called Eugenio Menegon. And then we include also existing research and add new research databases. So for instance, here with Matteo Ricci, there is this Shi Lai Yi as a varying title, and then you will find a whole explanation where this title is used. Or there is a note on the author, and that refers to the Manchu translator of the Tianzhu Shiyi. We were able to identify that, and you cannot write a whole article only on this translator, so we put it as 2 lines in the database. I give another example, the Mémoire concernant les Chinois, 15 volumes, plenty of articles, there is no index to it, so we made a whole index to it, and if you go to a specific article, you will find the references and including all kind of new research that we made the input of it. For instance, what were the sources used by Amyot? We make the table of contents that seem evident, but in these volumes you do not have this precise table of contents, and you have all kind of notes on text history using research by others, for instance by de Hergne, who gives the references to the manuscripts in the Bibliothèque de l'Institut de France in Paris. You find other examples here, simply a long explanation of one of the reprints, and also a note on the text history where we were able to consult a manuscript in the only manuscript in Japan, and we give the text that is missing in all the other copies, you see. So finally, we use also the database for new research. So you can do that by the advanced search. This still needs to be optimized, but you can say, oh, I want to know what are the texts published together between Ricci and Xu Guangxi, and you will find these texts. But you can retrieve all kind of other data. So lately we have been working, and that is interesting also for the work of the Boston University project. So on all the printing places, and these were churches. And in fact, we have to say it in the other way. We often know the existence of a church because there was a text published in that church. And so if you click on Chao Xing Tang, you will find all the texts that were published in that church. And this allowed us, and when I say us, this is a collaboration between Nora van den Bosch, one of the former students of our department, who then did a year of specialized studies in digital humanities, and who is now working in Aix-en-Provence. And so we are writing an article transposing these data in a visualization, just like this scheme, or a kind of geographical visualization. So I come to a conclusion. I mentioned that this is primarily a referential research database with these specific characteristics. So, and that's something, and of course, that depends on the aim of a specific database. In our case, at least, the real work is not the input or the data processing, but the research that precedes it. So we spent a lot of time on preparing the input as you have mentioned, as you have seen, it's not just making a bibliographical reference. This book is published in that year, not even for the secondary sources. So we are always happy when people also make references. You can say this is simply a research publication, so it's free of charge. So it's always nice also that you make references to the use of this database. At this moment, we think that we have about 79% of the Chinese primary sources in description, probably 80% of the European primary sources. The secondary sources, it's not always very clear because, of course, there are many new publications, but fortunately, sometimes we find older sources, and Eugenio Menegon is also sending us some articles that he finds from the 70s or 80s. That's always very nice. We still hope to increase the data. So there is still a lot to do: consultation of the Chinese primary sources, new library copies, facsimile, online copies, the identification of where they come from, the secondary sources through the U-China mailing list, people who simply send us things, or when we visit libraries, and of course the European manuscript sources, or simply the European sources. There you have sometimes very many reeditions, and that is they are not always included in it. So what is the SWOT analysis? The strength is probably the focus and the research. What's the weakness? The limits of the software system. Sometimes you have search problems, or you can not always retrieve the data that you want to retrieve. The opportunities, there is still a lot available for further research. And yeah, of course, the threats, that's in any system, the changes of a software system and the sustainability. I thank you very much for your attention. And if there are questions or suggestions, I'm willing to answer them.
So thank you very much, Nicholas. I wanted also to mention one thing that at the beginning I failed to do. Thank you to all for coming to this panel. We are looking forward to hearing from the experts who are presenting their projects, but we also want to remind you that this is a workshop on our own database. And so as you listen, remember that part of the goal of the workshop is to position the China Historical Christian Database to succeed. So what can we learn from what is shared today? What just Professor Xiao or Professor Stender told us? How can the combined expertise that is represented in the panel and among you, the audience, can help us build a tool that can be transformative for the work of scholars, students, and the public? And so what they are presenting is their own work, which is complementary to ours. What can we do that will complement their work and enhance it? So please keep that in mind also while asking your question. Please start typing your questions in the Q&A. And I start with the first question from Professor Anthony Clark. Given the speed at which new works are being published on late imperial Sino-Western exchange, how are you managing to keep the CCT database up to date?
I think it's going fairly well. One of our major sources is the U-China listserv. So there are now more than 700 people who are member of this listserv. And so we are fairly quickly informed about new publications. And certainly when people actively promote them or bring them, you see, we try to be very, very open. So for instance, there is a whole, there are many publications now in Korean, and we have good contacts to provide us with recent Korean publications. But what is important is that very often we have to read and first see them because we also want to keep, you see, there are at this moment in the China academic journals, there are so many publications, but we have to admit that not all these publications are really original. So we have also to see, do they add new data to the knowledge that exists? And that's why we often have to read it before we put it on the database. That's the research side.
There's another question from Professor Ryan Dance at the University of Alberta. Sustainability of digital resources is a huge issue. What are the digital humanities experts beyond the China field? What are they saying about this?
Yeah, I don't know whether I have to answer it because, but my point here is that we work together with people from, the experts in digital humanities. You see, I mentioned we had one of the students there who specialized in it, but at our university, we are in close contact with the whole specialist, the technical people who try to find solutions for what we need, you see. But anyway, this is something that is evolving very, very quickly. So we have to move with this movement, you see. It would be easy to say, let us have a system that is now the same for the next 20 years, but it doesn't work like that.
Correct. You have to change all the time. So I have a question, since I don't see more questions right now. I've been using a lot the CCT database, contributing to it and so on. One of the things that I like about databases in general, from libraries especially, is that using bibliographical software like Zotero or others, you can directly download the bibliographic information. I've tried to do that with the CCT, and there are problems with Pawtucket, the system that you are using. Is that so?
Yeah, that is so. That's one of the disadvantages, and that was a disadvantage that happened compared with the former system, because with Aleph this was possible. You see, and that's always, I think you explain very well. There are advantages with the new system, but there are also disadvantages. You see, one of the other things was that we could browse very nicely and simply say, give us all the articles that were published in Monumenta Serica about our topic, you see. And now we can no longer do that, and we could have the list of the shelf list in libraries. Now we can no longer do that, but there are other advantages. So that's one of the limits that you have. Yeah.
So to direct this to our database, the CHCD, what do you think would be a good function to have that can connect to a database like yours, or a referential database like yours, or the database of Professor Xiao? How do you think it should be done technically? Should it be links? Should it be other things? For example, we have a little biography, and then we have a geographical information about someone. How do we connect to a text written by that person or the bibliography about that person?
Yeah, there are, in fact, I'm not a specialist in it, but there is there is kind of software. One software that you can check is ODIS, ODIS, and that is used by CADOC. You know the institution, the Catholic Documentation Center in Leuven. But what it does is to combine all kinds of databases. So you can then search a person, and then you can see, oh, he was born in that year, and then in that database there are his archives, and in that database. So I was thinking in preparation of this meeting that this could be something to which you could, that you could consult to see whether that in one way or another could be a solution to what you are looking for, and how then our database, for instance, can be connected with it. Because for you, I think in our database, the most interesting things are the names and the places, you see. And then you automatically link to the text, you see.
Yeah. So can you repeat that, ODIS? How do you spell it?
O of Oriel, D of
ODIS?
IS, yes.
Yeah, because I cannot find it.
ODIS, yeah. Otherwise, I try to.
ODIS software, is that the one? No.
Let me just check. Yeah.
Maybe you can find it and send it in
And
the
then
chat.
I set it
So,
on in the,
yeah. So there are no more questions at this moment. Or there is another last question from Chloe Starr. In general, given different copyright perspectives between China and elsewhere, you mentioned not having copyright of the Paris Library text. How can databases be linked together in the future for mutual benefits? So there is this copyright issue. So your solution seems to be, Nicolas, to have links to the originals in the library in Paris.
Yeah, but another another suggestion. So when we look at China, so one of the points that when we talk about Chinese culture, it's so important, but how does it come that in Harvard, you can have access directly to the Chinese sources, and also in Paris, but that it's so difficult to have it in the National Library in Peking, you see? And so I mentioned that several times at conversations with Chinese scholars and with Chinese in this field. And you know Professor Yang Huilin, and he told me at a meeting about 3 weeks ago or something that Renmin University was partly involved in the 14th five-year plan, and that they managed to introduce that in the 14th five-year plan. So that will still take some time, but this is extremely good news. So that Chinese university like Renmin, I mean, it's of course, it's not a Renmin University, but in the five-year plan that you have something, because on a national level that you make the sources available to the public, to researchers, the open space. I mean, there is no reason why we should, in one way or another, I think we have to protect and we have to be careful about these sources. But the links, of course, why should that be closed?
Yeah,
we can simply make them open so that everybody can do research. And if that is happening in China, it's very good for the spreading and the research of Chinese culture, and of course, very good news for us scholars.
Yeah, there are more questions. I am collecting them. Maybe we'll go back to them later, but for now we have to move on. Thank you very much, Nicolas. Our next speaker is Mark Meer, who is well known to many of us who have gone to the USF Ricci Institute. He is now retired from there, but still active, and he woke up very early this morning. So we are very grateful to you, Mark. And he's going to talk about dynamic mapping and digital humanities, a brief look back and persistent problems. And he has been 30 years in the job, and he has a lot of wisdom to share. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Are you allowing my share?
Yes, we're seeing your screen. We're seeing also your desktop.
Oh, okay. Good.
So if you want, you can enlarge a little bit the window.
How's that?
Wonderful.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Menegon, for this introduction. I think my talk will touch on the other two talks in ways I think you'll see that we're all moving in the same direction. But I'd like to start with a look backwards. 25 years ago, Father Ed Malatesta was the director of the Ricci Institute at the University of San Francisco. Father Malatesta was one of the first Jesuits to return to China after it was possible to do so. And by 1995, he had already visited China many times. Always one to employ modern techniques to assist in his mission, Father Ed became particularly interested in the technology that was the then new World Wide Web offered for global outreach. So in the age of Windows 95 and Netscape Navigator, and during his infrequent visits home, he began to research what was possible for new technology. His nephew, Jonathan Hazlitt, who had recently started his own company, Open-Minded Solutions, became his advisor in this endeavor. OMS was a small 3-person startup that was using object-oriented design to create what was basically a management tool for human resources personnel, a tool that had much of the functionality for what are essentially a person's biography. And biographies are one category of data that Father Ed wanted to have. The distinction was that his biographies would be both historical as well as contemporary. Father Ed wanted to show the long history of the church in China and thought that beginning with the earliest contacts along the Silk Road and the arrival of the Jesuits in the 16th century, up to and including the modern Chinese church. And after much discussion, it was decided to break these down. These are a couple of early versions of our roundtable database. I'm sorry, they're only screen captures. The Ricci Institute has been closed since March, and I have not been able to actually access the old collections for more materials. This was the layout of the project. As you can see, they were originally broken down into several more categories, but we have archives, bibliographies, biographies, directory, institutions, and so on. Excuse me one sec here. I just want to set a timer so I don't talk too much. Now, the organization here is outlined with the description of each of the component parts. Now, from the beginning, maps were considered to be part of this layout, but in those days, the map technology was not very advanced, and it was mostly related to just graphical maps, just pictures of rare maps, basically. The biographical section was like so. Each entry would have the author's name or the title's name and its Chinese characters. You could click on one of the little diamonds to exhibit alternate names, locations, sending agency, things like that. And then a click on the main link would take you to the basic information. Here we have the bibliography section, which consists of the primary books. This has been superseded, of course, by the CCT database, but it gives you an idea of what we had done 20 years ago. This is what the book, if you open the record, would look like. In this case, it's the Dai Tian, and it would be other editions and so on. So this would be superseded by the CCT database now. However, one thing we did want to include was the works by Father Albert Chen, who was the curator of the China Province Library, which is part of the Ricci Institute Library. And his book, which was done by Father Chen and especially by Adrian Duding, who did spend months at the Ricci Institute cleaning up these entries so that we would have this catalog of books in the Jesuit archives. There's a lot of important material here that describes the books, where they were printed, and gives a lot of locative information. Now, this was the way the book was published. It was edited at the Ricci and was published by N.E. Sharp. We had permission to reuse the data, so we made some modifications. We converted from Wade Giles to Pinyin, aggregated the Pinyin, re-input all the Chinese text and characters so they were available at Unicode standard. And so you could see, for example, on the left-hand page, one of the book by Yanmo, that's in part of the series, a Chinese series collection from Taipei. And this is the same text that was in Father Chan's Japonica Sinica book. On the right hand, you'll see another one, which also uses Father Chan's information, but also in this case, because there was a publicly accessible text document, full text document from the Hathi Trust, we could embed the text in the record itself, because what we really wanted to have was a bibliographic catalog. Now, the original record in the Roundtable database was meant for just a general use. In this record, it's actually where you can find these things on our shelves. So it has that function as well. One of the drawbacks with the way, at least in the OCLC and the Western databases are concerned, is that the subject analysis is usually very poor. For example, Yuan Zhao Yi, they might just call it geometry or astronomy, mathematics. It's really more than that. It's sort of spherical astronomy and an isoperimetric inequality text. And by putting this data in the subject heading, it's much easier to focus on what you're actually looking for. One of the problems with some cataloging, for example, I'm thinking of the Asami collection of Korean books at Berkeley, is that if you don't know the name or the title, the author of the title of the book, you have no clue what's in it. There's almost no subject analysis at all. So there's no tag that tells you where I can find a book on spherical astronomy, for example, or who has such a book. And here's another example of the Jiao Lun. Our input system that we use in the Ricci Institute catalog, which is derived directly from the Roundtable bibliography section, is similar to the MARC format. It's not unlike the CCT database for input. There are certain required fields. Wherever you see a box, an empty text box, that's for free text. You can put that, mark up whatever title and things you need. But for repetitive data, titles, authors, publishing locations, there are text boxes which I can show you. And by the way, this is what a MARC record looks like, a machine readable catalog record. If you are a librarian at a North American or British library, this is what a library record for Matteo Ricci's Qianyu Shi for one edition, 1995 Shanghai Wuji Chubanqiu edition is. You notice that there is one subject heading, God. That's a pretty big setting. It's going to take you a while to weave through a lot of headings, a lot of titles to find this thing. The tags are separated, as you can see, they're linked to data, but this has the advantage of being widely used. It's a little bit cumbersome and it's a bit old-fashioned. It was designed in the 60s and primarily to produce cards, printed catalog cards, and it's a thing only librarians use or libraries use. But it is adaptable and it's familiar and it can be easily modified. If you were putting in a record in one of our sections, for example, this is what it would look like. You'd have, if there was a new an add or adding author, for example, you would add it to the create new and add line. If there was already one in existence, you could highlight it and just add it to the text directly. The same for record types, language, subject, publisher location, publisher, and so on. This is an interesting little project that Dr. Florin Stefan Morar at City University of Hong Kong has started. Florin was a fellow at the Ricci Institute 2 years ago, and now in Hong Kong. We discussed, his cartography is a specialty, and we discussed how you could use map technology and books for all sorts of different interpretive purposes. And in this case, you can see that he chose one country. You can see the highlighted is Italy there, and he's using basically Rome as the Vatican Library as his project startup. And what you'd see is if you clicked on the little indicator there, you would see that he search returns 935 results, and they're listing the Chinese books related to Christianity, also with detailed materials included. Which is very helpful. Now, how we find these databases and integrate them is interesting. I see by the URL that this is based on Koha and OPAC. So this is probably a MARC format that's been modified so that it displays, for example, the Chinese text, the Chinese title, and the opinion title in the same field. That the opinion is aggregated, so it's not broken up the way it is in the MARC format. And then other advantages. Moving on now to the old Ricci Roundtable database, we had a section on archives. This was based on Archie Crouch, Christianity in China handbook. This one happened to be, there was one for every country that had holdings. For example, in the United States, you could search for Massachusetts and you'd see the links for all of these different agencies. You could click on each link and you would find your way to the contents within. Now, in 1996 or 7, Father Malatesta met Professor Lou Lancaster of the University of California, Berkeley. And he and Howie Land had started this part of this new project called the Electronic Cultural Atlas Initiative, ECI. And their idea was a lot like the CHCD. It was to take map data and time data to apply data materials to it for data mining, for a better understanding of how things are located, All the reasons that the CHCD are important, except with an easier to use interface. Now, this is we started by using Charbonnier's book, Handbook of Locations in China, and we did every province in China, and we created a set. This one is for Shandong. I think there's about 213 or 214 entries of places. They're like churches, chapels, shrines, religious institutions, hospitals and dispensaries, and so on. We tried to give locations like street data, the Guobiao data from the cities. Eventually, we had longitude and latitude materials, dates of founding, when they were erected, when they were destroyed, who the founder was, when they were restored, and so on. There's a little bit blow up so you can get a better idea of what the contents are. These materials, including all of the data we gathered in the old Ricci roundtable, are contributed to the CHCD database. So because our roundtable started with this old object-oriented system and then migrated to a standard query language, a SQL language, but the structure of the language itself, and because we no longer had the university ran the server after we had to surrender it to the university control, they promptly broke it, and so it has been broken since then. So I think it's probably better to donate this material to the CHCD, which has a much more robust infrastructure, and we think we'll find a good home. By the way, one of the things about our online catalog that standard query language makes handy is that it's visible to search engines. This is something that university catalogs and many other databases are not. If you do a search for a particular title or name or concept, usually you will not find a hit. You will not get a hit onto one of these sort of buried treasures. But our databases and our library catalog is searchable or visible to standard search engines. Now, where do you find data? How do you get more map data or data that would help enhance the database? Well, we have here Auguste Colombel's Histoire de la Mission de Jiangnan, which is quite rare. There are a few libraries in Europe have it. We happen to have a copy at the Ricci Institute. In fact, it's Father Rouleau's, Francis Rouleau's copy that he took from this Sikaway library himself. He was allowed when he was, Father Rouleau was really the early founder of the Ricci Institute when it was called the Sino-Jesuit History Project. He had been a missionary in Shanghai from 1929 until 1952, and he was allowed to bring a large number of his own personal books with him when he moved. For example, we have here a page from Xu Guangqi's residence. This is actually a page that Gail King is going to be using in her new book on a new biography of Candide Xu. And you can see this house here where perhaps can be mapped to a current map of Shanghai where it used to be. The other thing that we have that I would suggest are things like in the archdiocese, the diocesan records archives of Guangzhou, which we happen to have at the Ricci Institute. For example, this is an architectural drawing, and architectural drawings come with all sorts of important details, usually locative details, not just how they are constructed, but where they are plotted on land. And so there are over 800 property deeds, bills of sale, maps and diagrams, elevations of buildings, construction notes, city permits, and all these things can be, as several scholars have already done, mined for information on local life, on how the contract law, how these things were handled and distributed. Finally, there would be the images. This is one other thing that Father Malatesta really loved. Images, for example, that these three paintings from our collection can all be pointed to the art department of Furen University in 1947 and 1948. And these would be sort of things we want to include. Now, the idea of copyright has come up, and in fact, this is an issue. Most organizations don't like to display their holdings this way, and I can understand. You can understand why, but it is a thing that, like, when in Father Ed's idea, that all this information would be freely available. The other thing that we haven't mentioned is our photographs, which are themselves a very important addition to the data that can be mined for the field. The other thing he really liked were sounds. One of his favorite sections, which we no longer maintain, were sermons and choir hymns and things from the Chinese church that he really loved. And it would be nice to include that. There's no reason why these cannot be connected by links or other means to the CHCD database project. We have here some of our rare maps. Again, for a while we were using KML files with Google Earth to make our own map layovers. So you could lay over a map for Hondius's map of Ming China, for example, and have it display properly on over a modern rendering of how accurate or inaccurate it would look, and follow the points, for example, the location of churches or church institutions within it. Here, this is another one, one from 1757, similarly done, where Ricci's own map. And I think it's really interesting that when Ricci and the early Jesuits got to China, cartography was one of the most important tools they had at their disposal. And I think it's really fitting that after 400 years or more, we're coming back to maps, still doing the best tools for the job. I'm sorry I rushed through this because I didn't want to take up too much time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark. And there are a few questions, so I will present them. So does the Ricci Roundtable database still work differently with different browsers? And is it being actively maintained and updated now? From Ryan Dunch.
Okay, no and no. It's no longer, it's browser agnostic. You can use any browser, but it is not currently being maintained. We maintain the browser, the site ourselves for many years, but for a variety of reasons, the university didn't like us running our own show, so to speak. So in taking over control of the database, they migrated the SQL database to a virtual machine. And somehow in doing so, they broke the attached the links that connected it, the cover to the data within. And yet we did the same thing for our library catalog, and it worked fine. I haven't got physical access and haven't had since before March. So I can't personally go there to fix it. And unfortunately, with the situation now with the distance learning and so on, it doesn't look like I'll be able to get there anytime until 2021. And also, I'm retired now, so I'm not going to be allowed back in.
On the other hand, we have an agreement with the Ricci Institute, with the director, Anthony Utherler, for the sharing of the data, as Mark mentioned. And so that will be wonderful that when it's possible, Mark will go recover the data and we will be able to use it as well for our database. Donald Altschiller, who is the history bibliographer at the Central Library at Boston University, asks, Dr. Mill mentioned in his abstract that the CHCD database has some similar problems to the prior Ricci Roundtable database. What type of problems still persist?
Okay, I would say things like copyright concerns, getting permissions to use images or documents or text, authority control. How do you manage all the various names, spellings, romanizations, character variations, terms? How do you keep control of that? There's some sort of authority for a name of a province. Of course, now with China, you can use the modern rendering. But what about 19th or 18th century China? The provincial borders have moved. How do you handle that? The names of individuals in different language traditions. How do you harmonize those and keep those in order? How do you get correct georef location data and dates for historical sites? How do you integrate other locales and institutions? For example, you want to, like the Ikai project did, that was primarily set up around Buddhist institutions, but they would map the distance from book printers, from Buddhist temples, from roads and shipping ports. How do cemeteries relate to the context? How shareable or interchangeable is data from national sources? We saw a couple of databases today that are using interesting technologies, but how can they be harmonized? I go back to the old example of Google Earth, which was, for all its flaws, is quite flexible. You could make a KML file and install it or distribute it, and you could actually have quite a nice display, at least for simple data. I remember about 15 years ago, there was the Freer Gallery had an exhibit called Encompassing the Globe, and they had you could download a little KML file plugin for Google Earth, and that would give the beautiful maps of the routes from Portugal around the Horn to East Asia. You could click on Macau or Jiaoqing and see Matteo Ricci's picture. There was lots of materials this way, and I wonder if those are the issues that could be applied. Those are some of the issues that I see having problems with. When we started also, we weren't doing this alone. We had arranged workshops in various countries. We had a big one in Wuhan at the Huazhong Chifan Daxue, the Central China Normal University. And everybody showed how to input, given passwords and allowed to put in data and so on. But the problem with our technology was that you had to do the markup by hand. The input was a little clunky. A lot of times they would take material that was from normally published sources that wasn't that rare. What Father Malatesta wanted was materials that would reveal the Chinese point of view, not another Western, book that was just being transposed into the database. So I see these things as problems that haven't really gone away. The technology has certainly improved greatly, and I think that with the organization that Boston University set up, they are trying for much more success than we had. And although ours worked for reasonably well for a number of years, we never had the manpower to do more with it. We only had a few people at the Institute, and not everyone could dedicate time to editing.
Yeah, and that is part of the sustainability. There is one last question, but we really are very pressed for time. So if you can answer very quickly. From Joseph Ho, given your experience in the evolution of these databases, what would be 3 ideal back-end characteristics that you would wish to see in a future database? Is this an argument for simplicity of platform design, institutional connection, or disconnection?
I think both Xiaoqing He and Professor Standard have mentioned this. They've had migratory issues. I think this is an issue with all the digital data. Are digital photographs or images you take now going to be viewable in 50 years? What will the technology be? I think this is not a problem just for this database, but for digital humanities as a whole. I think every step we take leads to longer longevity. I think the CHCD, the lifespan of this is going to be much longer than the early step that the Ricci Institute did with the roundtable. I mean, we were still dealing with Windows 95 and Netscape Navigator after all. And now the technologies are much greater. The bandwidth is much greater. There's much more room for data and expansion, and databases have come a long way.
Wonderful. So we have now to rejoin our common session. So I will be leaving, and I would like to tell everybody to leave this session, go back to your sheet with the Zoom guide and click again the link for the common session, and see you there in a minute. Bye-bye. Thank you again to all our speakers.